In this documentary, I'm going to be discussing two examples of VFX and motion graphics. I've chosen to do this around Game of Thrones, using the title sequence and the creation of the dragon by Image Engine. Now, I'm going to be discussing the compositional elements, the visual communication methods, and the audience and purpose and context of these productions. Now, the compositions, what I mean by compositions in visual arts such as VFX and motion graphics, composition is the placement of visual elements. Compositions means putting together, like putting all the elements of a VFX scene or motion graphic scene into place using a thought process in order to communicate the desired outcome to the person looking at it. Everybody instinctively responds to subject matter in productions. An image of a rose and an image of a thorn do not have the same response. In addition to subject matter, the formal aspects of visual composition are like the grammar of a language. This was a quote from Marvin Bartel, and he was actually discussing arts as in a drawing concept. Basically, all the elements that are put into a scene become part of a visual communication method. It's like a picture tells 1,000 words. There are several ways to do this depending on the desired outcome. The quote above is actually talking about art in the concept of drawing, but it draws the same bearing on visual effects and motion graphics alike. Visual communication methods may include colours. Dark colours could give an impression of a dark occurrence in a scene, whereas light and bright colours portray a light and bright visual message. Lighting works along the same principles as colour in visual communications. Camera angles and depth of camera. If a camera shot is close up to a subject's face and the angle is pointing upwards, it is thought that this creates a negative thought process instinctively to the viewer. If the angle and the depth is long and creates a tunnel, for example, between a path of trees and the end is in the distance, it makes viewers subconsciously think that it's going to be, say, a long journey, or it could be creepy, or it could be daunting. Visual typography. Looking at the works of the likes of Saul Bass and how he used typography in posters and title sequences such as Vertigo and The Man with the Golden Arm, he deliberately places elements to portray a message to anyone that sees it. Kinetic type became his signature and portrayed a thought of speed when he made it move quicker across the screen. And movement is another example. The way a subject moves gives a certain perception, and I used the dragon produced by Image Engine in the Game of Thrones Season 7 as an example. The audience that Game of Thrones was aimed at is around 16 years and upwards, although many younger viewers enjoy the television show. Image Engine created arguably one of the most impressive characters in the whole series, the fire-breathing dragon. The VFX created by Image Engine for the 7th season of Game of Thrones, Steve Kullback said, recalls Sean Walsh, VFX executive producer, "I know that Image Engine is capable of very complex creature work like the raptors for Jurassic Park or creatures for Fantastic Beasts. Would you consider assembling a team to take on a dragon for season 7? It's going to be bitching." There was a lot of research done by the production team into how the dragon would move. Again, because they wanted it to portray a certain picture, a visual communication. The shot below shows inspirational clips of bird of prey and a bat and how they move in the air while flying. You can clearly see from the images the resemblance in the movement from each creature. In this image, it shows the scale of the creation in comparison to a human, the concept art provided by Image Engine. The sequence of images below show the stages of inserting the dragon into the scene. The scene was filmed and the landscape then altered using VFX by Rodeo FX, Montreal-based VFX house. Rodeo FX created various simulations and CG environments using compositing techniques in Houdini or Nuke for the nighttime battle and fight scenes. One scene, such as the Grand Amphitheatre, where the show's principal characters met, would take several different images to produce the final render. Green screens were used in different locations within the scene from different points of view and camera angles. Finally, the dragon would have been added to the scene. The images below show examples of the different shots and green screen locations within this scene. There were several issues that needed to be solved with the creation of the dragon visual effects, one of them being the dragon's movement, and the movement of its rider combined. After researching several animals such as birds and bats as mentioned earlier, and also reptiles, the scale had to be multiplied 100 times over for the size of the dragon. The way Image FX solved the issue of the rider and dragon's movement was to film the rider on a simulator. This simulated the dragon's movements so that when the two sequences were combined, the rider and the dragon moved in conjunction with each other. To achieve the realism of the dragon, biological and physical factors had to be considered. And Image FX realised that to do this they needed to think about the dragon being more than skin deep. They had to consider things like how many flaps of wings it would take a creature of this size to stay aloft, and in what situations would a glide be more realistic. They discovered that if the dragon flapped its wings too often, this would make the dragon appear smaller very quickly. Artists had to consider the muscular and physiology build-up of the creature and implemented many subtle touches to reinforce the illusion of the creature being flesh and blood. The makeup of the dragon was changed for different camera shots. Close-up shots had further detail added to achieve the realistic image and visual communication. Other things that Image FX had to consider and problems they had to solve were dragons' emotions and how to show them, and the dragon's behaviours related to the bond with Daenerys Stormborn, who's the mother of dragons, the main character, the character who rode the dragons, and they wanted to give the visual communication of this really strong bond, and they had to use emotions within the visual effects of the dragon to do that. Image FX have worked on several other productions and created some outstanding visual effects creatures for huge productions, such as the raptors in Jurassic World and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. But they've also worked on some massive productions in TV and film, like Thor Ragnarok. They did a scene where they had a huge green screen put up on the side of a hill, and it was made in post-production to look as though they were looking out over the sea. Now, moving on to the title sequence of Game of Thrones. Now, this is probably the most acclaimed title sequence of all time. This was created, as in the title, as the opening title sequence to the HBO TV show Game of Thrones. The general idea was based around a map, such as the ones you find at the start of fantasy books, a legend or a map to give the readers a visual communication of where they are while reading the book. This was not originally an idea for a title sequence. There was going to be a selection of short map pieces to insert into the start of a scene, when that scene was in a different place to the previous one. The original idea for the title sequence was written in a pilot script by Dan Weiss and Dave Benioff, in which a raven would fly over King's Landing to Winterfell. But people are confused about where they are. Can you guys create little map pieces? Not a title sequence per se, but something that shows us exactly where we are when we go from place to place. Angus Wall, creative director, is quoted as saying this after a conversation with the producers. It was decided that the map idea would be pushed back into the title sequence. The title sequence was therefore not only created to be a title sequence, but also to act as a map/legend for the viewers as a visual aid, guide and communication to the world of Game of Thrones. The title sequence changes depending on the particular episode and visits the locations that are visited during that episode to give the viewers a visual image of where they are. Now, the motion graphics techniques that have been used, and I say motion graphics and not VFX because the entirety of the title sequence is made with motion graphics. Using paper and pencil to start, an artist will transform the cities, etc. into clockwork models. Mechanical drawings will show how the objects will build themselves into the title sequence. This step was influenced by Leonardo's drawings. And as you can see in these pictures here, there can be obvious comparisons made with the inspiration becomes clear when these images are viewed together. From there, the drawings are passed to their computer graphics department. One person will fine-tune the shadows cast by the objects, another team member will organise the camera angles and camera frames, still another team member will add the final tints and colour, this person the so-called smoke artist. Angus Wall's team, originally close to 30 team members for the first season when starting from scratch, but now down to around 10, began by designing digital gears, chains and corkscrews, and then applied high school physics to figure out how to raise the miniature manipulators. They had to build this from scratch in the computer and make sure they emulated real physical textures and materials, this definitely being motion graphics and not VFX, but also taking into account the visual communications and the message that they wanted to visually display and commute to the viewers. Now, Rock Paper Scissors Group, made up of Elastic, A52 and Jax, produced these scenes alongside other studios which added bits in along the way in other scenes and other works through Game of Thrones. But this title sequence is a perfect example of motion graphics against the dragon scenes, which are a perfect example of visual effects, both being used to great effect within one production.
This is Daniel Peat, HND student at West Notts University. I hope you enjoyed the documentary and parts of it you may have found useful, and who knows, it could help you out in one of your research reports in the future.